Hello, everyone. You got everybody? Well, good afternoon. And this is a very good afternoon. A very good afternoon. Today, we're bringing home Paul, Evan, Alsu, Vladimir. 3 American citizens and 1 American green card holder. All 4 have been imprisoned unjustly in Russia. Paul for nearly 6 years. Vladimir since 2022. Evan since March of 2023. And Alsu since October of 2023. Russian authorities arrested them, convicted them in show trials, and sentenced them to long prison terms with absolutely no legitimate reason whatsoever, none. Paul, a former Marine, was in Russia for a wedding. Evan, a journalist with a Russian in Russia, was in Russia, assigned by the Wall Street Journal. Alsu, also a journalist, was in Russia to see family. All 3 falsely accused of being spies. And Vladimir, who was a Russian citizen by birth and holds an American green card, is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and was a pallbearer at my friend John McCain's funeral with me. He spoke out against Putin's regime, and for that he was convicted of treason. And now, their brutal ordeal is over, and they're free. Moments ago, the families and I were able to speak to them on the telephone from the Oval Office. They're out of Russia. Earlier today, they were flown to Turkey, and soon they'll be wheels up on their way home to see their families. This is an incredible relief for all the family members gathered here. It's a relief to the friends and colleagues all across the country who've been praying for this day for a long time. The deal that made this possible was a feat of diplomacy and friendship. Friendship. Multiple countries helped get this done. They joined in difficult, complex negotiations at my request, and I personally thank them all again. And I've thanked them personally, and I'll thank them again. All told, Russia has released 16 prisoners. 8 Russians who are being held in the West will be sent home as well. These 16 prisoners from Russia that Russia has released include 4 Americans, 5 Germans, 7 Russian citizens who are political prisoners in their own country. One of those Russians runs a human rights organization, Memorial, which won a Nobel Prize in 2022. Putin threw him in prison for voicing opposition to the war in Ukraine. 4 others work with Alexei Navalny, a political opposition leader who died in Russia prison this year. Now they can live safely abroad and continue their work of advocating for democracy if they so choose. This deal would not have been made possible without our allies. Germany, Poland, Slovenia, Norway, and Turkey, they all stepped up and they stood with us. They stood with us. And they made bold and brave decisions, released prisoners being held in their countries who are justifiably being held, and provided logistical support to get the Americans home. So for anyone who questions whether allies matter, they do. They matter. And today is a powerful example of why it's vital to have friends in this world. Friends you can trust, work with, and depend upon, especially on matters of great consequence and sensitivity like this. Our alliances make our people safer, and we began to see that again today. Let me say this. It says a lot about the United States that we work relentlessly to free Americans who are unjustly held around the world. It also says a lot about us that this deal includes the release of Russian political prisoners. They stood up for democracy and human rights. Their own leaders threw them in prison. The United States helped secure their release as well. That's who we are in the United States. We stand for freedom, for liberty, for justice, not only for our own people, but for others as well. And that's why all Americans can take pride in what we've achieved today. I want to thank everyone in my administration who helped make this happen. Our work did not start just on day one. It started before day one. During the transition, I instructed our national security team to dig into all the cases of hostages being wrongfully detained, which were inherently, well, we inherited them from the prior administration. I wanted to make sure we hit the ground running, and we did. As of today, my administration has brought home over 70 Americans who were wrongfully detained and held hostage abroad, many since before I took office. Additionally, I issued an executive order in 2022 authorizing penalties like sanctions and travel bans on those who hold Americans against their will. And my State Department has introduced new warnings for Americans about the risk of being wrongfully detained by a foreign government. Deals like this one come with tough calls, and there are never any guarantees. But there's nothing that matters more to me than protecting Americans at home and abroad. And so we'll continue to work for the release of all wrongfully detained Americans around the world. Let me end where I began, with Paul, Evan, and also Vladimir and their families. They never gave up hope. We can't imagine what they've been through, all of you. Matter of fact, this lady right here, I think, was living in the Oval Office with us for a while. All kidding aside, can't imagine their joy right now. They're home. Tomorrow's a big day, the 13th birthday of Miriam. Miriam, where are you? Come here. You all know we have a tradition in the Biden family. We sing happy birthday on any birthday. You ready? All of you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Miriam. Happy birthday to you. Remember, no serious guys till you're 30. God love you. She's Alsu's daughter. Now she gets to celebrate with her mom. That's what this is all about. Families able to be together again, like they should have been all along. So I want to thank you again to everyone who did their part. In just a few hours, we'll welcome home our fellow Americans. We're looking forward to that. God willing, we're going to be out at Andrews and get that done. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And this is a good day.
What did you say to them on the phone, sir? What did you say when they answered the phone on the other side?
I said, welcome almost home.
How do you keep countries, these so-called abductor states, from simply taking more Americans in order to get more of their prisoners home? How do you end these perverse incentives, sir?
Well, we're advising people not to go certain places. Tell them what's at risk, what's at stake.
Mr. President, where are you going to these negotiations, and can you speak to the complexity of working with 6 countries to secure these releases?
Well, look, I'm not going to take the time now, but I'll do this later in the week. I particularly owe a great sense of gratitude to the Chancellor. The demands they're making of me required me to get some significant concessions from Germany, which they originally concluded they could not do because of the person in question. But everybody stepped up. Poland stepped up, Slovenia stepped up, Turkey stepped up. And it matters to have relationships. It really does. These things matter. Pardon me?
Could this improve relations with Russia? Is there any avenue for that after this prisoner exchange deal?
As my sister might say, your lips to God's ears, man.
Did you ever speak directly with Vladimir Putin about this, or would you be willing to speak with Putin now directly?
I don't need to speak with Putin. Anyway.
How did you weigh that decision of letting somebody out who sounds like that way we heard tonight?
I got home innocent people. Thank you. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Are you speaking with Erdogan or any of the leaders about this?
Say that again?
Are you speaking with President Erdogan or other leaders about this?
Yes, I've spoken to all the leaders about this.
What did you say? How do you
And by the way, as a father, look, you heard me say this before. I mean it. My dad had a simple proposition. Family is the beginning, the middle, and the end. Blood of my blood, bone of my bone. I can think of nothing more consequential. I mean it sincerely. And having lost family, not a different way, and not knowing what's happening, their circumstance when they're accidental, health, it matters.
Mr. President, what did Germany ask for in response for their cooperation?
Nothing.
What did Chancellor Scholz say?
President Trump has said repeatedly that he could have gotten the hostages out without giving anything in exchange. What do you say to that? What do you say to President Trump now, former president?
Why didn't he do it when he was president?
Sir, what did Chancellor Scholz say?
Thank you guys.
Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. This is War, Peace, and the Presidency. I'm Amy Goodman. An Israeli strike on a school in Gaza killed at least 30 Palestinians on Saturday and injured over 100 more. Thousands of Palestinians had been seeking shelter at the school in Deir al-Balah. Many of the victims were children. Survivors decried the Israeli attack.
Since November, we are here. Nothing happened. Today, they targeted us with missiles. We don't know where to go. There is no safe place. They tell us, go east, then west. We don't know where to go. The schools are not safe. The tents are not safe. And the houses are not safe. Where should we go? I'm going to sit in the middle of the street.
On Sunday, an Israeli airstrike in Khan Yunis killed 10 people, including a 4-month-old baby girl. Meanwhile, Israel's issued new orders for Palestinians to flee the Barej and Nuseirat refugee camps. According to UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, 86% of the Gaza Strip is now under evacuation orders, leaving Palestinians with no safe place to go. On Sunday, thousands of members of the Druze community in the occupied Golan Heights gathered for funerals for 12 children and teenagers killed in a rocket strike on a soccer field Saturday. Israel blamed the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah for the strike, but Hezbollah denies the claim. Axios reports Hezbollah officials have told the United Nations the deaths were caused by an Israeli anti-rocket interceptor projectile. The deaths occurred in the town of Majd al-Shams, in a part of Syria which has been under Israeli occupation since 1967. Diplomats fear the strike could spark a broader regional war. On Sunday, Israel's Security Cabinet authorized Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government to decide on the manner and timing of a military response. Netanyahu responded to the deaths in the Golan Heights by blocking the evacuation of 150 sick children in Gaza who were scheduled to receive treatment in the United Arab Emirates. Venezuela's National Electoral Council has declared President Nicolas Maduro the winner of Sunday's election, giving him a third term in office. But the opposition is rejecting the official results. According to the Electoral Council, early results show Maduro received about 51%, while opposition candidate Edmundo Gonzalez received 44%. This is Maduro speaking from Caracas.
In this new term you've given me, in this new term you've given to yourselves, I swear I'll give my whole life to carry out all the changes and transformations our country needs to head for a destiny of prosperity, a destiny of growth, of peace, of social happiness, to rescue all the rights violated by the economic war and imperialist missiles.
A delegation from the National Lawyers Guild said they found the election to be fair and transparent, but Venezuela opposition candidate Edmundo Gonzalez rejected the official results.
What happened during today's polling day was a violation of all rules, to the point that the majority of electoral registers have not been handed over. Our message of reconciliation and peaceful change still stands. We are convinced most Venezuelans also want this. Our struggle continues, and we won't rest until the will of the people of Venezuela is respected.
Gonzalez joined the race after the Venezuelan government barred opposition leader Maria Corina Machado from running. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the U.S. government had serious concerns about the Venezuelan election results. Blinken made the comment during a trip to Japan, where he and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin met their Japanese counterparts. Under a new deal, Austin announced the U.S. is planning to establish a new military command headquarters in Japan to counter China.
The United States will upgrade the U.S. Forces Japan to a joint force headquarters with expanded missions and operational responsibilities. Now, this will be the most significant change to U.S. Forces Japan since its creation, and one of the strongest improvements in our military ties with Japan in 70 years.
In Bangladesh, authorities restored communications over the weekend after an 11-day blackout in response to student protests against government job quotas. The protests were met with a violent crackdown with over 200 people killed. But some students say they'll resume demonstrations despite the rollback of the contested quotas until leaders of the protest movement are freed. Local media say police arrested at least 9,000 protesters. People are also demanding accountability for those who were killed.
My nephew was an innocent kid. Why did they kill him in such a brutal way? He was only a high school student.
Human Rights Watch has accused warring parties in Sudan's civil war, particularly the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, of committing widespread sexual violence, including gang rape, and forcing women and girls into marriages in the capital, Khartoum. Human Rights Watch also accuses both the RSF and the Sudanese military of committing war crimes by attacking healthcare workers and healthcare facilities. On Saturday, RSF forces attacked the Darfur city of El Fasher, killing 22 people. Donald Trump is facing new criticism after suggesting that the 2024 election could be the nation's last election if he wins in November. Trump made the comment in Florida at Turning Point Action's Believers Summit.
Christians, get out and vote just this time. You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed. It'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore, my beautiful Christians. I love you, Christians. I'm a Christian. I love you. Get out. You got to get out and vote. In 4 years, you don't have to vote again. We'll have it fixed so good you're not going to have to vote.
Donald Trump's running mate, Senator J.D. Vance, has doubled down on his remarks that the Democratic Party is being led by what he called childless cat ladies. Vance made the original comment on the Tucker Carlson show in 2021.
We're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made. And so they want to make the rest of the country miserable, too. And it's just a basic fact. You look at Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, AOC, the entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children.
On Friday, J.D. Vance appeared on the Megyn Kelly show and defended his remarks.
Obviously, it was a sarcastic comment. I've got nothing against cats. I've got nothing against dogs. I've got one dog at home, and I love him, Megyn. But look, this is not, people are focusing so much on the sarcasm and not on the substance of what I actually said. And the substance of what I said, Megyn, I'm sorry, it's true.
Election news, Kamala Harris has announced her presidential campaign raised more than $200 million over the past week. That's more than President Biden had raised in the first 3 months of the year when he was still running for re-election. Meanwhile, some of the Democratic Party's biggest donors, including LinkedIn co-founder Reid Hoffman, are openly pushing Harris to fire Federal Trade Commission Chair Lina Khan, who's led Biden's antitrust efforts. Hoffman sits on the board of Microsoft, which was sued by the FTC. President Biden's called for major reforms to the U.S. Supreme Court, including 18-year term limits, an enforceable code of ethics, and a constitutional amendment that would bar immunity for presidents who committed crimes while in office. In a new op-ed for The Washington Post, President Biden also cited the 2022 overturning of Roe v. Wade by the far-right court. The president did not, however, call for expanding the Supreme Court, which many Democrats and judicial reform experts have done. In Northern California, the rapidly spreading park fire has burned over 550 square miles, an area larger than the size of Los Angeles. The park fire is already one of the 10 largest fires in California's history and has now become the largest active wildfire in the United States, surpassing the raging Durkee fire in nearby eastern Oregon. In other climate news, police in New York City on Saturday arrested 59 protesters outside the home of Citigroup CEO Jane Fraser. The protest was part of Summer of Heat, a series of nonviolent direct action protests to end fossil fuel financing. Police have raided and cleared a pro-Palestinian encampment outside the home of Secretary of State Antony Blinken in McLean, Virginia. The encampment has been set up for 183 days to demand an end to U.S. support for Israel's war on Gaza. And in news from the Paris Olympics, Wassim Abusal received thunderous applause on Sunday as he became the first Palestinian boxer to participate in the Olympics. During the Olympic opening ceremony Friday, Abusal wore a shirt showing children being bombed in defiance of strict rules against making so-called political statements. After losing his match on Sunday, Abusal said, "The Olympic Games are already a victory for Palestine." And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, War, Peace, and the Presidency. I'm Amy Goodman.
An epic meltdown from the ex-president this afternoon, speaking with 3 journalists at the National Association of Black Journalists Conference in Chicago. A conversation that imploded right before our very eyes on live TV, essentially right out of the gates. Trump immediately breaking into a tirade against the first moderator, Rachel Scott of ABC News, who asked him about his past comments on race. And then Trump questioned Vice President Kamala Harris's racial identity. Take a listen.
Some of your own supporters, including Republicans on Capitol Hill, have labeled Vice President Kamala Harris, who is the first Black and Asian American woman to serve as vice president and be on a major party ticket, as a DEI hire. Is that acceptable language to you? And will you tell those Republicans and those supporters to stop it?
How do you define DEI? Go ahead. How do you define
diversity, equity, inclusion?
Okay, yeah, go ahead. Is that what your definition?
That is
give me a
literally
definition
the words
then. Would you give me a definition
DEI.
of that? Give me a definition.
Sir,
of
I'm
that.
asking you a question, a very direct question.
Define it for me, if you
I
would.
just defined it, sir. Do you believe that Vice President Kamala Harris is only on the ticket because she is a Black woman?
Well, I can say no. I think it's maybe a little bit different. So, I've known her a long time indirectly, not directly, very much, and she was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was Black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn Black, and now she wants to be known as Black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she Black?
She has always identified as a Black woman. She went to a historically Black college.
I respect either one, but she obviously doesn't, because she was Indian all the way, and then all of a sudden she made a turn, and she became a Black person.
Just to be clear, sir, do you believe that she is...
I think somebody should look into that, too, when you continue in a very hostile, nasty tone.
It's a direct question, sir. Do you believe that Vice President Kamala Harris is a DEI hire, as some Republicans have said?
I really don't know. Could be.
It's amazing he's gotten away with that for as long as he has. But it appears to be over. The 35-minute conversation was like that basically throughout. It remained contentious. Trump even defended his Black jobs comment in a room full of Black journalists.
I will tell you that coming from the border are millions and millions of people that happen to be taking Black jobs. You had the best.
What exactly is a Black job, sir?
A Black job is anybody that has a job. That's what it is. Anybody that has a job.
All right.
Vice President Kamala Harris's response to all of this: absolute disaster for Donald Trump. This is who he is. A source close to Vice President Harris tells NBC News in response to Trump's claim that she, quote, became black, quote, "It is simply a lie and easily disproved. She went to Howard, for Christ's sake. She's an AKA," referring, of course, to the historically African-American sorority Alpha Kappa Alpha. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre was in the middle of her briefing when Trump's comments were taking place. She first laughed in shock and then said this.
As a person of color, as a black woman who is in this position that is standing before you at this podium behind this lectern, what he just said, what you just read out to me, is repulsive, it's insulting, and, you know, no one has any right to tell someone who they are, how they identify. That is no one's right. It is someone's own decisions. It is, I'll add this. Only she can speak to her experience. Only she can speak to what it's like. She's the only person that can do that. And I think it's insulting for anybody. It doesn't matter if it's a former leader, a former president. It is insulting. And we have to put, she is the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris. We have to put some respect on her name.
Before we start today with some of our favorite experts and friends, the Reverend Al Sharpton joins us. He hosts Politics Nation right here on MSNBC. He's also the president of the National Action Network. With me at the table, former senator and co-host of MSNBC's How to Win 2024 podcast, our friend Claire McCaskill's here. Also joining us, NBC News correspondent Yamiche Alcindor. She was at the convention in Chicago watching Trump's appearance as it took place. She's also our correspondent on the Harris campaign. Yamiche, let me start with you. Just go through, I don't even know how you rank the offenses, not just to the people in the room, but to everybody. But take a stab at it for us.
Well, I think this was really a remarkable moment in what has been a remarkable campaign season. To see former President Trump in front of a group of Black journalists who invited him to answer questions about policy, about his views on the campaign trail, about his views about America and his vision for the future, and to have him go after Vice President Harris in this way that is really, really questioning her identity, questioning her authenticity, was really, really something to behold. And I think as someone who's covering the Harris campaign, and it was covered, frankly, the vice president, when she was a senator way back, more than a decade now, I've been following her work and interviewing her. It's very clear that she's been very, very, very pointed and also very, very articulate when it comes to talking about her background, talking about what she got from her mother and her father being a Black man who was of Jamaican descent, her mother being someone who was Indian. She talks about how that background and her parents meeting as civil rights activists, taking her to protest in a stroller, that she had her identity really, really very clearly understood her identity as from when she was a little girl. So to hear him say that she had been claiming to be only Indian and only now is talking about being African American is just frankly not true, Nicole. She went to a historically Black college. She pledged and joined a historically Black sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, the first historically African American sorority founded in this country. And she's time and time again throughout her career talked about the importance of racial justice and tying it back to her own identity. So this really is something that I think is, it is really hard to fathom that former President Trump thought that this insult, this attack was going to land. It just doesn't make sense to even say this. And in talking to people, you read some of the reporting that I got. I was sitting in the room and people were stunned, right? I'm going to take you a little bit behind the scenes. People were stunned. People were gasping. There were some people who were shouting back at him, saying that's a lie. So the room, the atmosphere, I think, was already sort of tense because this is a president that has attacked a number of National Association Black journalists. There was a lot of questions whether or not he should be invited. Everyone had different opinions. But when he started sort of talking about her race, it really just I think really made the room feel very much like this is a palpable anger from some people. And again, journalists, we're covering him objectively, we're covering him fairly. But I think when you start to say things that are just simply not true and going after someone's blackness, it really hurts. And I want to just read to you some of the things that I got when I was texting Harris sources. One person said he's completely unhinged. This is Trump. He cannot help himself. As you said, someone else says this completely insulting and repulsive. Exactly what Karine Jean-Pierre said from the podium. Someone else said it's simply a lie, easily disproven. She went to Howard for Christ's sake. Another person said this is painful, and I think painful might be something that Reverend Sharpton can talk about, because there's a whole history of Black people having to deal with discrimination and having to deal with people taking their lives for their race and who they are. And Vice President Harris has really found herself in the lineage of that. Let's also talk about the fact that she was at the in Selma, Alabama, at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, talking about racial justice, and to have this there can be policy differences, right? You can have policy differences. You can have different visions for the world. But this attack was just something that was, I think, that was really, really a low bar, even for former President Trump, who has gone very, very much a low bar, gone very much underground in some of the comments he's made about different people.
That was Vice President Kamala Harris addressing the convention of Sigma Gamma Rho Society Incorporated in Houston, Texas. Still with me, Stuart Stevens, Senior Advisor for the Lincoln Project, Valencia Johnson, Democratic strategist, and Kadia Goba, reporter for Semaphore, who interviewed Donald Trump today at the NABJ conference. So that to be honest, I thought she'd have a little bit more fun and lean into that conversation that you had today, Kadia, with Donald Trump. But I think what we saw was her sort of making a note of it, and not having that frame how she wants to run this campaign and how she wants to be as president. How did you read what she said there, just overall, and how she's framing herself as you have others out there, particularly, at other media outlets, trying to define her a certain way, DEI, candidate, for example?
Yeah, I know you raised a good point. I think she was very careful about how she characterized that the incident or the interview earlier today, but she brought it up, and
right.
I think
Bring
that.
it up.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Donald Trump just gave her, a whole new ad campaign that she could possibly run on in the future. But she was, respectful about it. Didn't dig too hard. But she said, her framing was, this is what you can expect, right? He hasn't changed. And like I said, he just kind of gave her that. So one of the first things I was thinking about when this was happening, I was like, oh, well, this is a great opportunity for his opponent to really highlight that. But also she talked on all the other hit on all the other points. I was surprised she didn't do the offense on immigration, but she brought up abortion, reminding people this guy said that he would, promise to put judges in, and this is what he did, and then pivoted on to what we now see as the rollback of Roe versus Wade.
Alencia, for Democrats, this is 180 degrees from where you were 4 weeks ago. There's no doubt about that. The energy is different. The mood of the country about the presidential campaign has changed. What have you seen that translates for you into the possibilities this fall for winning this election, holding the House, maybe gaining additional seats there, and maybe even keeping the Senate in viable play, given the way the Harris campaign has really come out of the blocks and has taken moments like this and has galvanized, not just those interests within the Democratic Party, those who are already Democrats support the party, et cetera, but a lot of folks that Stuart and I know, center-right independent voters, center-right Republicans, who are looking now and taking another look.
Listen, I think since Vice President Harris has become the presumptive nominee, we still have to go through convention and her accept the nomination. The path to our victory has opened up quite a bit more, right? I think the reality is in this race, we already knew what we were voting against, right? The past, I would say the 1700s form of ideology that the Republican Party is running on. We knew what we were voting against. We knew that they overturned these rights for women, for Black people, for anybody who was not white male benefiting from nepotism. But she is symbolizing now the hope for the future. We can see hope for the future. I want to be very clear that this engagement at Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated, their conference, I am a member of the Divine Nine. I'm a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. This was actually already planned. She was actually going to speak to the sororities in the Divine Nine this summer because, as many people know, and maybe some viewers don't understand, these organizations are anchors in Black communities, and there are hundreds of thousands of members. We're already actually excited about her. Now there's even more energy now that she's the presumptive nominee, and they are even more galvanized to go out and make sure they expand the electorate. Since she was announced, as her candidacy was announced last week, we see more young people who are engaged. The numbers are moving in our favor. You all have reported extensively on the different coalitions that have organically come up across Zoom, from Black women and Women with Black Women all the way to White Dudes for Kamala Harris this week that raised $4 million. And that coalition is going to continue to expand, and it's going to include a lot of factions of the party, from the moderates, the never Trumpers, to also the progressives and young people and everyone in between.
Stuart, our friend Tim Miller put out a tweet while watching what was happening on the stage there at the NABJ interview. And he said, this interview was an example of why the people who demand that we deplatform Trump are wrong. People should see this. A grumpy, cruel, hard of hearing, race-baiting a-hole, having to actually answer for his track record in an environment outside of his comfort zone. I happen to agree 1,000% with that view. I know, if I recall, I think you do too. The more the public sees and hears Donald Trump, in many cases, he makes the case against himself.
Yeah, I think what's different about this than flashing back to 2016, where you're just throwing up Trump rallies. This is different. He's on stage with 3 journalists who are challenging him, who are asking him tough questions. Trump, he doesn't like women. He is terrified of Black women. He sees much of what has happened to him as a result of Black women, and he refuses to take responsibility for anything. You know, if you were working for the Donald Trump campaign, when you were watching this, it was like watching a baby crawl across the interstate at night. You just couldn't look, and they couldn't get him off that stage fast enough. And, you know, this is a long campaign. You can't hide Donald Trump. And what's happened is, you know, I've seen this before in campaigns. When campaigns, a candidate thinks they're going to win, and then that gets pulled back from them. That can be a devastating moment for them. And very few candidates have the emotional maturity to deal with that well. They have to adjust and they have to come back. I don't think Donald Trump has the ability to adjust here. I think this is the Donald Trump, the angry Donald Trump, embittered, you owe me, why are you stopping me from what is my rightful, I already am president of the United States, people just don't realize it. And I think it's extraordinarily unattractive to most Americans.
The latest Bloomberg Morning Consult poll shows Vice President Kamala Harris leading Donald Trump by 1 point, which is within the margin of error among crucial swing state voters. So what are we to make of the 2 dueling campaign strategies we saw play out today, with Donald Trump speaking to the National Association of Black Journalists and Vice President Kamala Harris addressing Sigma Gamma Rho sorority, one of the country's 9 most prominent Black fraternities and sororities that make up what is known as the Divine Nine. Joining me now is Faz Shakir, the campaign manager for Bernie Sanders' 2020 presidential campaign and founder and executive director of More Perfect Union. Faz, thank you for being with me. I think today was such an interesting case study in how these 2 campaigns are operating. And I wonder what you make of the Trump strategy to go to a high-profile conference, take a Q&A session, and the Harris campaign saying nothing of the editorial that emerged from it, and the Harris strategy to go down and talk directly with, a network of black sorority women and organizers, for lack of a better term, who have a proven historical record of mobilizing voters in previous election cycles.
Yeah, Kamala Harris is consolidating the Democratic base, firing people up and spending her time to jump from event to event right now. And next week, I think she's going to 7 battleground states in the course of a few days. So she's on fire and she's trying to build that energy. Trump, I think Yamiche mentioned it in the prior segment. I think she was right on that he wants to get the mic back in his hands. And one of the classic tactics of Trump that we've known forever is that he psychologically trolls his opponent when he feels like the mic has left his hands. So here comes Bird Brain Haley, and here comes Ron DeSanctimonious, and attacks on Jeb Bush that you remember, and Marco Rubio, small hands, and all kinds of things that he has laid at the feet of all of his prior people just to try to psychologically troll them and control the narrative back over to him. And quite frankly, what it does is try to distract the opponent from talking about the things that they want to talk about. You saw on Vice President Harris tonight, she's not going to get distracted by it. I think people just want to see the jab at Trump, but say, I know the messages that are going to work. The 2 words that we've seen from her over and over, Alex, are freedom, which is the freedom to control your own body, freedom to thrive in this economy, and prosecutor. I'm a tough prosecutor who's going to bring accountability to this government and make things happen for you. That's working for her. And the more she does that and introduces herself to a lot of people who are going to come online at post-Labor Day as low-propensity voters and dial into this race for the first time, that's what they need to hear from her.
Yeah, and just as an organizing strategy, it looks pretty clearly, and Tim Alberta has done some great reporting on this at The Atlantic, that the Trump campaign is not interested in grassroots door knocking. They're not interested in the sort of shoe leather campaigning. That doesn't feel like the strategy that the Democrats are pursuing, right? I mean,
Yes.
This is like an established network of people who are, already in community with one another and talking to one another in a very real grassroots fashion, as opposed to kind of making hay among, an assembled group of black journalists that don't have any particular connection to Trump or his campaign.
I am confident, you're seeing the enthusiasm already, that the Democrats will have a strong grassroots game in all the core battleground states and beyond to turn out the vote. But I will caution this, because you mentioned this about Trump. And yes, he has a different tactic. He always has. He relies more on social media, not the classic organizing. We now hear from the New York Times that there's a super PAC coming online to try to fill in the gaps for him to do some of this organizing. Here's the caution, though, and I want all our Democratic friends to hear this. Donald Trump has been in 2 presidential elections, 2016, 2020. In each of them, he outperformed the number of votes that people thought he was going to get heading into Election Day. So we shouldn't fool ourselves into thinking that somehow because he's not investing in certain things that we are investing in, that people aren't going to turn out. He's got a high level of loyalty there. These rallies and the crowds that he generates are organizing strategies for them. And I would go into Election Day assuming that whatever the polls are, he's going to outperform them, because that has been the track record. It just means, just like in 2020, our outperformance, our voter turnout is just going to swamp his, and hopefully we crush him.
It's an important cautionary note to sound, Faz, just because we also have reporting from Nate Silver at the New York Times suggesting she is a favorite right now to win the popular vote, but Trump still has a lead on the Electoral College, and that is the reality of getting elected in the U.S. presidency. You got to win the Electoral College. So what would your advice be to people who are looking at the Harris strategy and trying to turn the momentum into real practical victory?
Again, I offer this just as a caution, Alex, which is that they've run in 2 presidential elections. They know their voters. That's a huge advantage for Trump. They know who voted over the 16 and 20. We don't know necessarily exactly all the voter universe for Harris. I think it could be larger, right? If you look at Obama in 08, it could be larger if young people turn out in large numbers. But it means that the work for us is that much harder to make sure we're trying to reach out beyond what might have been the Biden turnout vote. And try to talk to people and not assume that we already know where they're at, because Harris could turn and move persuasion in one way, and it also could, quite frankly, move in the other way. But it's going to require that organizing person to person.
Faz Shakir, always good to talk to you, my friend. Thanks for being here tonight.
You know how I know that Donald Trump is lying when he says that he knows nothing about Project 2025? The mastermind of Project 2025 is leaving his job after being pressured to quit by the Trump campaign. But while Trump plays dumb, distancing himself from the 952-page manifesto and the people behind it, His running mate is showing just how fully on board he is with it. Senator J.D. Vance wrote the foreword for an upcoming book by the leader of the parent organization of Project 2025, Heritage Foundation President Kevin Roberts. In it, Vance writes, quote, "We are now all realizing that it's time to circle the wagons and load the muskets. In the fights that lay ahead, these ideas are an essential weapon," unquote. It is abundantly clear why the Trump campaign wants to run away from Project 2025, because it's terrible and wildly unpopular and dangerous and weird, like their plans to deal with the climate crisis and the environment. Last week, the Earth experienced the 4 hottest days ever on the heels of 13 months of unprecedented global high temperatures. Project 2025 would further harm the planet while rewarding corporate polluters and the fossil fuel industry at our expense. Project 2025 plans to make our air and water dirtier by limiting the Environmental Protection Agency's ability to combat pollution and eliminating limits on forever chemicals in drinking water. It calls for withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement, gutting clean energy programs, and repealing President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act and its investments in renewable energy. But what they really want to do is drill, baby, drill, and give oil and gas companies access to more public lands and waters, making them even richer and many of us sicker. Joining me now is Jamie Henn, founder and director of Fossil Free Media, a nonprofit that supports putting an end to fossil fuels and addressing the climate crisis. Jamie, I have pointed out some of the egregious things in their climate plan. What are some of the things that really scare you the most?
Well, Joy, thanks for having me. Look, Project 2025 is the greatest assault on our environmental and public health protections that we've seen in a generation. You know, as you said, this plan takes a chainsaw to a lot of the basic protections that I think Americans have come to rely on. You know, when we turn on the tap, we expect there to be clean drinking water. Project 2025 would dismantle the Office of Law Enforcement at the EPA's Water Division so that polluters would be free to put whatever chemicals they want into our drinking supply. We expect to breathe clean air. Project 2025 guts the ability of the EPA to regulate pollution from power plants and cars, making the air unsafe to breathe and our kids even sicker. We expect to eat healthy food. We hope that chemicals aren't in there. As you said, Project 2025 aims to undo the progress that the Biden-Harris administration has made on PFAS and aims to reclassify tens of thousands of other toxic substances that big polluters want to keep using at the expense of our health. And finally, you know, I work on climate and I have a 3-year-old daughter. I worry about her future. Project 2025 would undo all of the progress that we've made over the last 4 years on climate, putting all of our families at risk. I think environmental protections can feel like a nice to have sometimes, but this is really about our health, our bodies, our kids. All of that is at stake in this election, and this plan takes direct aim at those protections.
Yeah, I mean, I lived in Florida for 14 years. You know, if you get rid of NOAA, people are going to die. If there's no predictability of storms that are coming, that's life-saving for people in Florida, Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana, places where storms can literally kill you. I grew up in Colorado, tornadoes. You know, if you're literally taking away the agency that at least warns people this stuff is coming, people are going to die. Let me read you a couple of the quotes from Project 2025. Quote, "The Biden administration's climate fanaticism will need a whole of government unwinding." Here's another one. The federal government has an obligation to develop the vast oil, gas, and coal resources for which it is responsible. I'll just do one more. Eliminating the standalone Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights at the EPA. That is the office that focuses on how race and income affects access to clean air, land, and water. It addresses things like the existence of Louisiana's Cancer Alley. So basically, they're also going to remove any chance of knowing which communities are being poisoned first and most.
Yeah, let's break down each of those because they're great examples of what this project aims to do. The last one you mentioned is really key. We know that Black, Brown, Indigenous communities in this country bear the brunt of fossil fuel industry pollution and climate impacts. The Trump Project 2025 plan aims to strip all of that from the EPA so that we can't even use any of those indicators to go look at a community like Cancer Alley and figure out what's going on and how we protect people in harm's way. The other part you mentioned is to borrow a phrase, the really weird part, right? They want to privatize the National Weather Service because some of Trump's donors have big stakes in weather companies. That means that if you're in the path of a hurricane, you're going to have to pay to get information if you should leave your house, or you're going to rely on Trump and his Sharpie to figure out if you need to evacuate. They want to eliminate NOAA, as you mentioned, mostly because that's the agency that does some of the best climate science research in this country. So this plan really goes after our agencies, both with a sledgehammer, but also a scalpel, going through every last little division to try and strip out any mention of environmental justice and any mention of climate. But I think it's even worse than that, because as you say, this isn't just about dismantling agencies. It's about turning them into wholly owned subsidiaries of the fossil fuel industry. I mean, EPA becomes the Environmental Polluters Agency. It works on behalf of big oil and gas under this plan. Bureau of Land Management becomes prospectors for oil and gas companies so that they can drill on our public lands and in our state parks. This is a truly radical version of this sort of policy and a completely dangerous plan that will really impact every American that lives in this country.
No wonder Donald Trump is going to the oil and gas billionaires and saying, give me $1 billion, because he's going to do their bidding. Jamie Henn, thank you so much. Please come back. This was very important information. And for more, thank you. And for more of our segments on Project 2025 and how it promises to upend our republic, you can go to msnbc.com/readout Project 2025.
Whoa, baby, what a difference a month makes for Democrats. Take a look at the front page of the New York Times 4 weeks ago today. The top story all about how some in the party were worried about President Biden's mental state after the debate with Trump. And here's the New York Times today. I'm going to quote it. Everything is different now for Democrats. Their crowds are dancing. Beyonce has conquered the soundtrack. The celebrities, from Southern rappers to Hollywood actors, are showing up. The headline of that story sums up the question on everybody's mind. How long can Democrats ride this incredible wave of new energy? Well, this evening, I'm glad to welcome someone who knows the likely nominee, Vice President Harris, very, very well. Democratic Senator Cory Booker of the greatest state in the nation, New Jersey. Senator, it is always good to see you. We have so much to talk about, but I want to start with something pretty serious. I want to get your response, your reaction to what former President Donald Trump said about Vice President Harris's race today at the NABJ event, and really how he's responded since then.
Look, I think that this is a standard playbook for Donald Trump to try to deflect and divide. He brings up things that he knows will be considered outrageous by people on our side of the aisle. And all we want to do now is talk about that. And this is really his ability to deflect from what the real issues of this election are and try to divide our country against itself and opportunistically capitalize on that. Think about this for a second. We are talking about whether a black woman is black. And all these people are rushing to say, oh, she was an AKA and she went to a historically black college. Enough of that. Let's talk about the economy. Let's talk about health care. Donald Trump doesn't want to talk about that. He doesn't want to talk about his ripping away of a woman to control her own body and make her own health care decisions. He doesn't want to talk about the fact that he blew one of the biggest deficits in our budget that we've ever seen in my lifetime, all to give overwhelmingly tax cuts to the wealthiest there are, and not middle class tax cuts the way they could be and as they were under Harris and Biden with the child tax credit. He does not want to talk about the issues. So what does he do? What he's done for his entire times aspiring to get into politics. Talk about birtherism and the outrageous claim that Barack Obama wasn't born in the United States, and have us running around talking about that and trying to prove it. Talk about the Central Park Five when he was irrelevant and getting his name into the New York Times. This is what he does. This is supposed to bring our country together for common aspiration and common purpose and really the sense of common cause. He divides us against each other using racial tropes as his tool. I've seen this in the Republican Party too much.
Then do you think this election is going to be, you said the most important issues of the election, you brought up policy, and there's lots of questions. What is Kamala Harris's policy going to be on X or Y? Is this election going to be about policy? Because Donald Trump, to the point you just made, never covers that.
No, and he's going to do his best. And I've seen this playbook. You want to talk about DEI, CRT, whatever letters they can bring up that are about dividing America along racial lines, religious or gender. I want our party, and I know what Kamala Harris wants to talk about, is the economy. Which administration, Trump or Biden-Harris, created more jobs? Which created more manufacturing jobs? Even look at something like the stock market and how corporations and businesses did. In fact, I know this has been more black business new starts as well as overall business entrepreneurial new starts in the last year to 2 years than in any 1 to 2 year period before in the last 25 years. This is an administration under Biden-Harris that has a record to run on in terms of our economy, in terms of lowering the costs of prescription drugs. Trump talked about it. Biden-Harris lowered the cost of insulin. Infrastructure week here in Jersey, as you are, the biggest infrastructure investments ever made in the history of our state in the New York, New Jersey region. Donald Trump had infrastructure week, but Biden-Harris actually got some investments done. This is
Senator,
about the future.
I have to correct you. Donald Trump had 8 infrastructure weeks. He did not have 1. He had 8. What do you say to those who look at this incredible buzz around the vice president, around this campaign, who are wondering how it happened? Some are even doubting that this enthusiasm, this fundraising, some don't even believe it's real. What do you say about the excitement to them?
Well, look, I say, in God we trust, but everybody else bring me data. I look at the data points. I'm just coming from campaigning in Nevada, where they've had a tidal wave of people signing up to volunteer over these last 95 days of the campaign. In fact, they're having record-breaking people signing up to make phone calls, to knock on doors, to write postcards. I look at the money coming in. That's real dollars and cents that you can measure, and they have broken records, not just for Democratic presidential nominees or Republican nominees, all presidential nominees in all of time. They have created a record now for a 1-week haul. This is an extraordinarily exciting time, and this momentum is going to continue. And Donald Trump doesn't know what to do, so he falls back on his old playbook when he started his last campaign, casting aspersions that were outrageous about saying that people who come across the border are rapists and murderers. And that made everybody want to talk about that as opposed to real policy. Donald Trump is going to continue his old-fashioned playbook of saying outrageous, divisive things to deflect from the core issues of middle-class families, which should unite us. What should we be talking about today? The fact that the United Auto Workers, my grandfather got out of poverty because of the UAW jobs. They have endorsed Kamala Harris, one of the most important working class unions that there are. These are the real issues and the building blocks that build for a winning campaign in places like Michigan. Donald Trump doesn't want to talk about that. He wants to divide us along racial lines, divide us along gender lines, as opposed to what we need to do as a country right now is forget the tribalism, forget the divisiveness, but unite as a nation around our common cause and common purpose.
Well, perhaps that's why he's chosen J.D. Vance, who shares in the spreading outrageous ideas and divisiveness. And I want to talk about the child tax credit, because Senator Schumer is putting the bipartisan child tax credit expansion up for a vote tomorrow. And there's actually some Senate Republicans who want to block this thing. I'm confused by it. You work in the Senate, so I need an explanation. J.D. Vance has made it very clear Republicans are the pro-family party. Right? His whole brand is family, family, family. But on top of that, it seems like he might not even be able to cast a vote because he's going to be campaigning in Arizona tomorrow. Can you explain this to me? Pro-family and expanding the child tax credit should be hand in hand.
Yeah, under Biden, we got it for 1 year. We were 1 vote shy. One Republican could have joined us to extend the largest middle-class tax cut. Over 85% of New Jerseyans got this tax cut, the expansion of the child tax credit. It cut child poverty in our country in half and brought children below the poverty line above. And by the way, their outcomes explode when you get children above the poverty line in terms of lifetime earnings and other positive outcomes. If you are pro-family, you would be there to vote for this bipartisan bill. And I'll tell you more than that. Donald Trump did not have the kind of bipartisan successes that Biden and Harris have on the first gun legislation in over 20 years, bipartisan infrastructure act, bipartisan CHIPS Act. This is a presidency and a vice presidency have joined together to do positive things. And what frustrates me is that these pro-family folks won't join Democrats in pushing paid family leave, in pushing for maternal care. We have the highest maternal mortality rate, in pushing the kind of policies that strengthen families at the kitchen table, strengthen families who want to raise children. And we have got to start talking about those things as plainly as we have. And who is fighting for American families, who is fighting for safe childbirth, who is fighting for these kind of basic freedoms in our country, and who's making it more expensive for families, more difficult for families, harder to find affordable child care, harder to have paid family leave. And that's folks like J.D. Vance. Look at their voting records.
This is an interesting case because in Arizona, the statewide victory of the Democratic candidates in the last election depended in some case on the fact that there were Republicans who feel that your state has a rich history of conservatism, and these quacks are not it.
Unfortunately, they are not it. However, this is what we are fighting, and we have to be ready. This is why Democrats have to step up. This is why we have to defeat election deniers like Kari Lake. And if you want to join me in doing that, please go to Gallego for Arizona to help us. We're going to need every bit of help. But we are losing honorable men and women, Republicans in the Reagan conservative nature, because they're standing up for democracy. Stephen Richer is a neighbor of mine. Literally, he is my neighbor. We have dinner together. We have drinks together. Our families know each other. And even though, he and I will disagree almost 90% of the time, at the core, we agree on one thing, that we love our democracy and we'll do anything to defend it. And it's scary that we are running away from the McCain veterans, the veterans that have been fighting to save this country for so long, and running to the election deniers that we see, such as in the vein of Kari Lake.
So now tell me about that. Show me what that path looks like to victory for you and those who want to keep going with this republic that we've got in the United States for November. Because on one hand, it's a big flashing red light how many votes the Republican victors like Kari Lake got last night. On the other hand, it does alienate those McCain Republicans. It does alienate mainstream conservatives. It does alienate a whole lot of people who were talked about in those Trump indictments, who are Republicans who said, I'm not going to go against the Constitution of the United States for you, Donald Trump.
Look, the way it looks like is I go and I talk to everybody. I've been traveling this state for 18 months, going to some of the reddest parts of the state, talking to veterans, talking about how we had an oath and did an oath to protect the Constitution of the United States. I'm very proud that I'm a Iraq combat veteran. And like many other veterans in this country, independents, Republicans, we care first about defending our republic and defending the Constitution of the United States. And then we worry about the politics. And I think a lot of them, and from talking to them, they are stepping up with me. They're going to say that we're going to defend this republic, we're going to defend democracy, and we're going to do it at the ballot box. Once we start with that base, then we're going out even further. We're talking to people that feel that they've been left out from the Republican Party. You're going to be talking to Mayor Giles next pretty soon. That's a perfect example of a conservative Republican mayor who has done everything he can for his community, and yet his own party has pushed him out. We are talking to them on the fact that we are the party that is willing to bring them in, have a big tent, and really fight for a future of Arizona. You're not going to get that from the Kari Lake campaign. All she has is divisiveness, anger, and not an ability to even unify her party, let alone the whole state.
Let's talk about the presidential race. In Arizona, you've got this existential issue of democracy and believing in elections. You can sort of combine that with the abortion issue because it is related to our personal freedoms.
It's freedom, absolutely,
right.
Yes.
On the other hand, you've got Kamala Harris, who is talking about a future and not looking back. It's sort of a different vein of campaign, and it seems to be working. It's positive. It's very future oriented. What's going to play in Arizona?
Look, Arizona is an aspirational state. People move here to continue their lives, to grow, to buy a house, start their families, study, start businesses. This state is doing the gangbusters when it comes to business startups. We have the lowest unemployment in the history of the country. So looking forward, but recognize that we have challenges really matters. And this is why it's important that we talk about what we're going to do, not just who you should hate. We're going to talk about how we're going to work together, not how you're going to divide us, which is what you get from people like Carrie Lake. We're going to talk about the successes we had with the CHIPS Act, where we're actually bringing in some of the most high-tech jobs that this country has seen, and they're all happening here in Arizona. So that is what it's going to happen. If you go and talk to Latinos, a very big growing population in this state. I just had a great event, Juntos con Gallego, and we talked about the American dream and how you could acquire that American dream here in the United States, but you need to have someone that actually believes in you. And we are the people. I am that campaign that actually believes not just in Latinos being able to accomplish the American dream, but any Arizonan, as long as they're willing to put their gut into it and their fight into it.
The border issue is a real issue for Arizonans. Talk to me about that. It is a attack line that Republicans are using with Kamala Harris. Talk to me about how you approach it in your state.
Well, look, the way I approach it is the same thing I've been doing. I've been going and talking to our border mayors, border sheriffs, border county officials, talking to border patrols. As a matter of fact, I actually met with Border Patrol Union this morning down in Yuma, Arizona. And we've been sitting down listening for quite a while, and also providing the resources they need in order for them to try to control that border. To our mayors and sheriffs and first responders, for them to not be overwhelmed by the broken immigration system. Which remind people that we want a border solution, right? And there was a border solution that was negotiated between Democrats and Republicans. And cynical politicians like Carrie Lake said, without reading that bill, to reject it. Why? Not because there's a better solution, but it was a better political outcome for her. We are going to bring the border solutions that it needs so we can finally have security on the border, while at the same time making sure that we leave open the possibility and work for comprehensive immigration reform.
विंटेज लंदन टू हिस्टोरिक इटली टू अपना राजस्थान सब देखा।
अफोर्ड कैसे कर लेते हो, माइट?
अगोड़ा बुक नाउ एंड गेट अ लव राइड। पाइए कमाल के प्राइसेस अक्रॉस 3.9 मिलियन होटल्स एंड होमस्टेज। अगोड़ा, दुनिया देखो कम दाम में।
Joining me now to discuss the ideas behind his new piece titled A Foreign Policy for the World as It is Ben Rhodes. He's the former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Obama, an MSNBC political contributor, and the author of the book After the Fall, The Rise of Authoritarianism and the World We've Made. And Ben's story is the cover story on the current issue of Foreign Affairs. Ben, good to see you. Thank you for joining us this morning. I want to just read a passage from your article in which you say, meeting the moment requires abandoning a mindset of American primacy and recognizing that the world will be a turbulent place for years to come. Above all, it requires building a bridge to the future, not the past, which is a through line that runs through your story, that the future is not what we are used to. It's not what policymaking in Washington has been accustomed to. What does that mean in practical terms?
Well, I think the United States sometimes, because of its muscle memory, still acts as if we have the degree of power and influence that we had in the world in, say, the 90s or the immediate post-9/11 era, when we essentially called the shots. And now we're living in a world where America's standing has been diminished for a lot of reasons, Ali, from the Iraq War to the financial crisis to the election of Donald Trump and the first Trump presidency. But also because Russia is committed to tearing down the world order. China is committed to building an alternative world order. And we can't go around the world and kind of dictate outcomes. And this is that clinging to primacy, that clinging to the idea that we can call the shots and dictate exactly how things are going to play out. Well, there's a lot in the world that is pushing back against that impulse, including a war in Ukraine, a war in the Middle East, and some fault lines between the United States and China and Asia. And the last thing I think any of us want is this kind of drift that we've been in towards kind of global conflagration. And I think the more America tries to insist that all these issues have to go entirely how we want them to be, paradoxically, the less likely we are to make progress and the more likely we are to get into conflict. Because if you have a zero-sum view and you're matching that against a bunch of other zero-sum views, a bunch of nationalist countries duking it out, that leads to war. That's what history tells us.
How would you characterize for a voter the distinctions between Joe Biden and Donald Trump as it relates to your conversation here, your very detailed conversation about a new foreign policy for America? What would you say you're making a choice between? Because as you and I know, we both love global affairs, but it's not typically the thing a voter decides on.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd say these things do matter because take a look around the world. These are real wars. These are the largest land war in Europe since World War II, a major conflict that could escalate more in the Middle East, and a conflict in China with China that could dwarf them all. So we're back in the kind of Cold War days, Ali, where this should matter as a voting issue because if things go wrong, they can go wrong very badly. In terms of the choice, I think, look, Donald Trump, let's be blunt. He's not respected. He's not taken seriously around the world. He's a chaos agent. He's incapable of working with other countries to solve problems. One of the points I make in the article, Ali, is that Donald Trump's erratic trade war with China contributed significantly to the inflation that we've been feeling in our country. That never gets discussed. Donald Trump's tearing up agreements contributed, I believe, directly to October 7th. Between Israel and Hamas. And so Donald Trump's not going to solve these problems and he's going to make them worse. And you're taking a chance on a volatile strongman sharing the stage globally with a bunch of other volatile strongmen and Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin and Narendra Modi. I don't think that's a recipe for solving any problems here. So if Trump offers kind of chaos and risk, I think Joe Biden at least offers, again, the predictability of an America that is functioning in line with a set of allies, functioning in line with a set of familiar interests to the United States. I would like to see Biden kind of abandon what we've seen, for instance, in Gaza, where we're kind of going through the motions of how we used to do things. You know, we have to hug Israel. We have to sign on to a maximalist objective of destroying Hamas that is not achievable. That's gotten us into trouble. So where I think Biden needs to go is he needs to kind of let go of some of these presumptions that we can shape things in the way we once did 20 or 30 years ago.
Let's just zero in on that issue of Israel and Gaza. There are some people who have said they will not vote for Joe Biden or they will withhold their vote. They may not vote against him. They may not vote for Donald Trump as a result of the bear hug of Israel. Is there something, and I'm sure the administration is working very hard to try and get the ceasefire deal that seems remarkably elusive, but is there a world in which that deal can be good enough to convince people that Biden can be in the right place on this and that you shouldn't withhold your vote because the chaos of having Donald Trump as president is not going to look better for anybody as it relates to the Middle East?
First of all, as someone who's been quite critical, as you know, Ali, of their Gaza policy, I do have to say to people here, elections are not about perfect outcomes. They're about choices. Donald Trump would be far more damaging. Donald Trump would embrace, I think, the Israeli right wing's goal of literally annexing the West Bank. There would be no effort to get assistance into people in Gaza. So one point I'd make is just the choice is very stark, even with the dissatisfaction that many people, including myself, feel over Gaza. I think what's incumbent on the administration is to recognize that good politics is not whether or not, you embrace the Israeli prime minister. Good politics is good policy outcomes. And the full embrace of the most far-right government in Israel's history has not led to good policy outcomes. It's contributed to a kind of a sense of impunity that the Israeli government feels that they don't need to have a plan for Gaza, that they can have this absurd objective of destroying Hamas, which is not achievable. A lot of Hamas's leadership isn't even in Gaza, never mind capable of being destroyed through the kind of military operation we've seen. So I'd like to see them be more straightforward with people about what they're trying to achieve. Instead of telling us about an Israeli proposal for a ceasefire that the Israeli prime minister himself can't say he agrees with, let's lay out, okay, here's what our objective is. And if we don't see the Israeli government moving in line with that objective, we don't need to ship them offensive military weapons. That is essential for the maintenance of what they're doing. And so I do think that people want policy outcomes as much as they want to see political messaging on this.
I just came back from Central Asia, where it was amazing to see, whether you like it or not, the economic influence, which turns into political influence, that China has over these post-Soviet parts of the world. And it really causes us to have a discussion discussion in America about whether China is ally or adversary or somewhere in between, and what our strategy going forth looks like. As you said, Trump had some interesting ideas about China, but he was so ham-fisted and just uncoordinated about it that it never emerged into anything meaningful. I worry about that all the time, that the average American doesn't know what to think about China and our future.
I think the average American wants to make sure that China's not ripping us off, stealing our intellectual property, breaking trade rules. But I think the average American knows that we have to coexist with China. They're going to be a big, powerful, rich country, whether we like it or not. And the last thing that the world wants and that Americans want is an out-and-out conflict with China. And Ali, I think we've overcorrected in this country. We went from a policy of engagement with China, trying to work things out, to a huge pendulum swing towards confrontation, not just under Trump, but also under Biden. Tariffs, export controls, restricting investment, restricting technology, geopolitical competition. I think some of that was definitely necessary, some of that correction. But I think we've now overcorrected because we're not going to, quote unquote, defeat China. They're going to get advanced technologies. They need to be a part of the climate solution. They need to be a part of the regulation of artificial intelligence. And we need to be talking to them if we want to avoid a war in Taiwan. And so I think we have to shift from the kind of confrontational mode that we've been in to one of competitive coexistence here, where there's a negotiation as well as a competition taking place.
Ben, let me ask you one other question. For those who don't concern themselves too much with foreign policy, who are mostly concerned with domestic policy, there is an argument to be made here when you look into history at those countries that destroyed themselves domestically, and that had an influence on the world. And I think about Germany in the 1930s. Domestic policy influences foreign policy. The two are completely intertwined. They're not separate thoughts, and we probably have to stop thinking about them as separate thoughts.
Yeah, completely. I'd say for people who don't care about foreign policy, I'd say, look, not only should we be worried about wars, but the climate crisis, migration, technology, all these things are inherently tied to what happens around the world. But importantly, to people who work on foreign policy, they need to realize that politics really matters. Foreign policy is an extension of politics. You get the foreign policy from a country based on what's happening politically inside of it. And so the most important thing the United States can do for global democracy and stability is to be more democratic and stable at home. We're getting kind of in the world a reflection of what's happening in all of our respective countries. So the number one thing I say at the end of this piece is the number one thing America can do is detoxify its own democracy. That's going to reverberate on the world more than any foreign policy could.
100% right. As I travel the world, and the same thing with you, all you hear about is people's concerns are greater about American stability than their own countries and their own politics. If we were just stable and we could just look like we had a reasonable future, that alone might add to global stability. What a great article. I really recommend everybody read it. It's the cover story in Foreign Affairs magazine. Ben, thanks very much for joining us. As always, pleasure to see you. Ben Rhodes joining us on, he's a former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Obama. He's the co-host of the remarkable Pod Save the World podcast and the author of After the Fall, The Rise of Authoritarianism in the World We've Made. A group of congressional Democrats are joining forces in an effort to fight the far-right initiative known as Project 2025. Project 2025 is a policy plan to be enacted if Donald Trump returns to the White House. It's crafted by the right-wing think tank, the Heritage Foundation, and several former Trump administration officials. Their 920-page playbook details a mission to essentially dismantle the federal government and replace it with a radical conservative vision. Joining me now is one of the congressional leaders who helped found the Stop Project 2025 task force, the Democratic Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts, who's a great friend of this show. It's been too long. I'm glad to have you back here, Congresswoman. Thank you for being with us. I would love to just talk to you about this, except that my colleagues over on the show the weekend before me had the president of the Heritage Foundation, Kevin Roberts, on. It was a bit of a jaw-dropping interview because he said all the quiet parts out loud, which is what Project 2025 is, which is why it's so important for people to understand that. How do you, in short form, tell people who don't know or understand the danger of this thing what this 920-page document is?
Project 2025 is a chillingly similar McCarthyism 900 plus blueprint policy, not proposal. These are plans, and it's a transition plan. It calls for the replacing of dedicated civil servants with Trump loyalists. In fact, they already have an open portal where they're accepting applications to test people's loyalties to Donald Trump. It is a dismantling of the federal government as we know it. It would cause harm to every single person that calls this country home. It would eliminate the Department of Education. It would eliminate critical Title I funding for K through 12 schools. It bans books. It bans abortion. It bans words like abortion, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's just been my experience in my 5 years in Congress that these extremists do not make threats. They make promises. And so we've established Project 2025, this task force, to raise public awareness about this, to use every congressional tool available to us, from oversight and accountability, to ensure that this does not become a reality. And although much of the implication of Project 2025 and this hateful, harmful policy blueprint and transition plan has focused on federal agencies, it also implicates the courts. I just want to, reference that given your earlier segment, because the Heritage Foundation and the same mega donors that have produced this are the same people that are influencing Supreme Court justices like Alito and Thomas, and who want to seat other justices like them on the bench. And so this cannot happen without the election of Donald Trump, Project 2025, and it cannot happen without the Supreme Court being enlisted as co-conspirators and accomplices, which is why, in my opinion, we need to expand the court. We need a binding and enforceable code of ethics and investigations into any justices with a history of corruption or impropriety on the court.
I think it's interesting. These extremists, as you said, do not make threats. They make promises. And when Kevin Roberts was on with my colleagues, he brought up one of the things you mentioned, this concept of how to deal with abortion. He's not sugarcoating it. He says exactly what he means. Here's what the organization and the plan has to say about abortion.
Abortion's not health care. I find it really interesting, if not worse, that you wouldn't support the change of the department name to the Department of Life. I thought we were all in support of life. We believe eminently in women's rights, and particularly women's rights in the womb. And so the real question that you should be asking
I just want to know, if I may, though, because I do have some questions here.
Why aren't we talking about the people
I just
who
want to
are
know,
supporting legislation that abortion can happen until 3 days after the person's born? This is an absurd framing by this network.
That is an absurd assertion. As a person with an actual womb, I'm telling you that does not happen.
So
but let me just back up.
Legislators in California, Virginia, New York, who
Dr.
actually
Roberts,
filed this bill.
Does Heritage and Project 2025 believe that a woman should be able to have an abortion if her doctor says that she needs one? This is a yes or no question.
Abortion is not health care.
So
abortion is the
no?
murder of a human being.
I appreciate that there's no ambiguity with Project 2025, but I think what you're trying to do is get the American people, American voters, to understand there is no ambiguity. Like that answer he provided about abortion, there are 50 more answers like that about everything else that's in Project 2025.
Absolutely. And we want to make sure that people know exactly what kind of harm would be caused by this frightening blueprint policy plan and transition plan. So we have to do everything possible to stop Project 2025 from being made real.
Let's talk about your congressman, by the way, or your colleague, the Congressman Jamal Bowman, who's running for re-election in New York against the Westchester County Executive George Latimer. He's hosting a rally in the Bronx today with Senator Bernie Sanders and with Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You're going to be joining him on the campaign trail tomorrow. He's got a primary next week. Talk to me about this a little bit. What's going on in that primary?
Well, yes, I'm hitting the ground and coming in to do everything possible to ensure that Jamal Bowman is returned to represent the New York 16. Jamal Bowman was decisively elected by a broad and intersectional coalition. and he has represented them well in that time. This is someone who is an advocate, who is an educator, who is an effective legislator, someone who I've gone to for partnership on everything, and his leadership on everything from climate and environmental justice to fighting for clean water, to ensure that things like clean water and housing are not a privilege, but are a human right. I've also partnered with him on working to dismantle the school to prison pipeline, to address the crisis of mental health and anxiety amongst our young people. He is a father of 3 children, and I know he sees every child as his own and wants to ensure in particular that those 2 daughters that he is raising, that they grow up in a world where they don't have fewer rights than, myself and other women do right now, given this march towards a ban on abortion, the banning of reproductive rights and justice and maternal justice. So he's an effective legislator, decisively elected. He's proven, he's an advocate, he's an educator, and he champions progressive policies that are sorely needed and very popular. And that's exactly why he has earned the endorsement of Senator Elizabeth Warren, amongst others. And he has the respect of this caucus, which is also why he has the endorsement of Hakeem Jeffries.
Is it your concern that this challenge and the forces behind it have more to do with positions he's taken on the war in Israel and Gaza?
Jamal Bowman has taken strong progressive stances, period. And so this has made him a target for right-wing special interests who want to buy this seat and to silence him. They want to silence Jamal Bowman. They want to silence the progressive movement, which only continues to grow. But Jamal Bowman is someone who leads with love, who centers the people. He has been my partner in good, again, on so many issues of consequence, from childcare to addressing the baby formula shortage during the pandemic, to fighting against the criminalization disparately of Black and brown students in our schools. He has proven, and I want to say this, although he is a dear friend, I did not give Jamal Bowman my endorsement. He earned it. He earned it in the same way that he was decisively elected to Congress. He has earned it in word and deed in what he does on behalf of the people each and every day. In freshman orientation, they told us to never forget the plot. It's easy to forget the plot in the process of legislating and governing, and the plot is the people. And Jamal Bowman has never and will never forget the people.
I want to ask you about the consequences of the upcoming election, but we're going to take one quick break. If you just don't mind hanging out for me, we're going to continue this conversation on the other side. Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley joins me again. Thank you for being back with us, Congresswoman. My colleagues this morning on the weekend also asked the Heritage Foundation President Kevin Roberts about whether the Heritage Foundation would accept the results of the election in November. I was gobsmacked by the response. Let's listen together.
Is your organization going to accept the results of the 2024 election, regardless of the outcome?
Yes, if there isn't massive fraud like there was in 2020.
What does that mean?
If there isn't massive fraud.
Do you believe that there was not massive fraud?
But there was massive fraud. We have an election fraud database that has documented that over years. By the way, the Heritage Foundation has been concerned about election integrity for decades, not just about 2020. We've been documenting this problem for a very long time. And if one of the
I believe, according to the Heritage Foundation, sir, by your count, Heritage Foundation has done an investigation, and according to your count, there have been 1,513 proven instances of voter fraud across the United States since 1982.
Yeah, that's probably
1,513.
Because they're very hard to document. And the Democrat Party is very good at fraud.
Ayanna Pressley saved me. I mean, kudos to Michael Steele and Simone Sanders for their patience in that conversation. He's on national TV lying.
It would be funny if it weren't so frightening. And again, it's more of the same. These are the same people who seek to erase history, to revise and rewrite history, the same people who believe that insurrectionists were just everyday tourists, just walking about the Capitol. It is delusional. Yeah. And it is frightening that people like him. I mean, to say that they've always cared about election integrity, give me a break. So again, Project 2025, we have to do everything possible in this task force to leverage every congressional tool available to sunlight is the best disinfectant, to make sure that people are aware of these policy plans and this transition plan and this blueprint, which would dismantle the federal government as we know it. Every single person who calls this country home will experience harm. It is not a threat. It is a promise, much like as they outlined in Project 2025, that Dobbs was just the beginning. We've already seen that in real time. More dominoes have fallen. First, it was Dobbs. Then they went after birth control and contraceptives. Then they went after IVF. Then they went after mifepristone. So they will enlist anyone as co-conspirators and accomplices in this hateful and harmful agenda. And that is exactly why I'm coming to New York to campaign for my colleague, the effective legislator, Jamal Bowman, who fights for workers' rights, for housing justice, for climate justice, for a child care and infrastructure and care economy, for equitable and quality schools. This progressive movement has continued to grow. This is in many ways backlash to that. I don't know if you know this, but the Congressional Progressive Caucus is currently the biggest ideological caucus in Congress. So what that says to me is that progressive policies are popular and deeply resonant because they go as far and as deep as the herd. And Jamal Bowman recognizes the herd and that our destinies are tied, that we are one human family, from Ukraine to Gaza to Israel to Massachusetts to Haiti to the New York 16.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about
humanity
that.
And dignity.
And you're right about the idea that Project 25 is a reaction, because their whole section on climate change refers to those who believe in climate change, global warming as a woke agenda, and they're going to reverse all that. I think we should just make a commitment to do what you said. If sunlight is the best disinfectant, talk about this Project 2025 every week so that Americans understand. Those who are wavering, those who are thinking about voting for Donald Trump, understand. Don't be surprised if you get what they promised you.
Shine a light, and we'll keep working in the meantime.
Ayanna Pressley, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. The Democratic representative, Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts. With more on this, I'm joined by Monica Medina, a distinguished fellow at Conservation International and the former Assistant Secretary of State for Ocean, Environment, and Science. Also joining us is Bill McKibben, a distinguished scholar of environmental studies at Middlebury College, a contributing writer at The New Yorker, and founder of Third Act, which organizes work on climate and racial justice. Welcome to both of you. I'm sorry, Bill, if that sounded a bit alarmist. I know that you're not given to being alarmist, but people have to understand that this is now policy. This is the kind of thing that the Heritage Foundation and conservative groups have said will happen if Donald Trump is elected. And while we may not be able to roll back climate change, they're even going to roll back the things that allow us to protect ourselves from the impacts of climate change.
I think you were being under alarmist, if anything, Ali.
Fair enough.
And to give you a sense why, look at what happened in Florida in the last 2 weeks. Governor DeSantis, in his continuing audition as a kind of mini Trump, told the state of Florida that they can't even mention climate change in any official legislation. This at a time when Florida is living through the hottest temperatures and muggiest weather ever recorded in what's traditionally a fairly hot place already, at a time when the sea surface temperatures off the coast of Florida are higher than they've ever been, and they're staring down the barrel of what may be the worst hurricane season of all time. What Trump is going to do this time is going to be far worse than what he did last time. And last time he pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accords. That's because he's got the playbook laid out, ready to go this time. And I'll tell you what the kind of final frosting on the cake is. He wants to defund the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, who are the people who maintain the thermometers that tell us how hot it is. I think in his world, if we don't know, then we won't have to talk about it.
Yeah, Monica, it's like COVID testing, right? If you don't test people for COVID, then you don't have COVID. I mean, you were involved in NOAA. This is your bailiwick. This is very serious stuff. We need more science, more measurement, and more ways to figure out action, not fewer. I can't even get my head around what Project 2025 and Trump are thinking.
Thank you so much, Ali, for having me on. And you put it exactly right. He won't just politicize the